Hello and welcome to the final episode of Wrestling in 1990, Wrestling in 1990, episode 12, and the rest. How this episode is going to work, I'm going to go through some of the promotions that I could find, talk about them, not in great detail like the other episodes, but talk about the wrestlers that wrestled for these promotions and if they have any championships or special moments, things like that. Also, at the end of this episode, I'm going to thank a few people that have helped me through this first year, and I will also be revealing the awards for 1990 for Wrestler of the Year, Tag Team of the Year, Match of the Year, and Promotion of the Year. So with that, let's get started with the first promotion on my list, 5-Star Wrestling. 5-Star Wrestling is a promotion that was founded by Grizzly Smith. If you don't know who Grizzly Smith is, he is Jake the Snake Roberts, Rockin' Robin, and Sam Houston's father. This promotion did not last very long. They did start a tournament to crown their first ever 5-star heavyweight champion. I'm not sure if this tournament ever ended and a champion was ever crowned. 5-Star Wrestling did have a ladies world champion, and the first and only champion, to the best of my knowledge, is Rockin' Robin. The title they used for this ladies world title is Rockin' Robin's old WWF Women's Championship that she was still in possession of. Other stars that wrestled for 5-Star Wrestling include the Junkyard Dog, Sam Houston, Nature Boy Buddy Landel, General Skandar Akbar, the Great Kokina, who would later on be known as Yokozuna, Kamala, Bob Orton, and they would even have their own Ultimate Warrior ripoff called The Warrior. The next promotion we're going to talk about started the year off as the NAWA, but later on in the year changed its name to the SAPW. Wrestlers in this promotion in 1990 include Vince Torelli, who would be the future Ken Shamrock, Ivan Koloff, Baron Sammed, who is the future Papa Shango and Godfather in the WWF, the Nasty Boys, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Robert Fuller, Paul Jones, and Matt Bourne. They had 2 championship belts. First, the NAWA heavyweight title, later on the SAPW heavyweight title. The first champion would be crowned on June 30th, 1990, and it was Robert Fuller. He would hold the title for 91 days before losing the title to Paul Jones. Paul Jones would not even be champion for a day before Robert Fuller would win the title back. In November, the title would be vacated, and the title would stay vacated for the rest of the year. They would also introduce tag team titles. The first champions were crowned on July 28, 1990, won by the Nasty Boys. They would hold the titles for 45 days. They would lose the tag team titles to the Pit Bulldogs, who would be champions for 109 days before losing the titles to the Fantastics. The Fantastics would finish the year as tag team champions. The next promotion we're going to talk about is ICW, International Championship Wrestling. In ICW, they had 3 championship belts. The first championship was the ICW Heavyweight Championship. At the start of the year, Tony Atlas is the champion. He would lose the title in July to Vic Steamboat. Vic Steamboat would finish the year as the ICW Heavyweight Champion. Also, the ICW tag team titles, held in 1990 by the team of Lethal Weapon, Dennis Condrey, and Doug Gilbert. The tag titles would be vacated, but would be won by the tag team known as The Undertakers. This tag team known as The Undertakers were actually the first Undertakers. Mark Calloway would only become the WWF version of The Undertaker later on this year. The Undertakers would finish the year as ICW Tag Team Champions. The third and final title would be the ICW Junior Heavyweight Championship. Ray Odyssey would start the year as champion and end the year as champion. Other wrestlers wrestling for ICW in 1990 include Tasmanian Devil, which is the future Taz in ECW, Equalizer Zap, which is the future Johnny Grunge of ECW, and Curly Moe, a parody of Curly from the Three Stooges. Now let's talk about a promotion that I imagine a lot of people thought was going to have its own episode, Herb Abrams' UWF. Herb Abrams only started to have shows in September or October, so for those reasons, that's why it didn't get its own episode. On the roster in 1990, wrestlers include Cactus Jack, Dangerous Dan Spivey, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, Dr. Death Steve Williams, David Sanmartino, B. Brian Blair, Billy Jack Haynes, Colonel De Beers, Ivan Koloff, Nikita Koloff, Ken Patera, the Viking, who would later on be known as Ludwig Borga, Bob Orton Jr., Larry Zbyszko, Wild Thing Steve Ray, Iceman King Parsons, and Don Morocco. They would record their first set of TV tapings in September of 1990. There would be no championship belts in UWF in 1990. Their first title would be in 1991, which would be the UWF Sports Channel Television Championship. The title would be won by Dr. Death Steve Williams. Herb Abrams had a notorious drug problem and would often not pay his wrestlers. In 1991, Herb Abrams would even bring in Andre the Giant and have him on TV for a number of shows before Andre would just go back to the WWF. UWF would have shows on and off till they would have their final show on September 23rd, 1994, the Blackjack Brawl. Almost every match on this card was for a championship. The main event of the Blackjack Brawl saw Dr. Death Steve Williams defend the UWF World Heavyweight title versus Sid Vicious. Dr. Death would get the win via disqualification, which is the most UWF match you can have. Herb Abrams would die on July 23rd, 1996. It was a drug-filled ending. Next up, Universal Pro Wrestling. This was a lucha libre promotion in Japan. One of the wrestlers that would get his start in the promotion would go by the name of Masa Michinoku and Masanori Murakami. Later on, he would be known as the Great Sasuke. Universal Pro would also give the start to Shoji Akiyoshi and Black Eyed Man. This is the future Jado and Gedo, who are now with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Another future legend that would wrestle for Universal Pro Wrestling is Yoshihiro Asai, later on known as Ultimo Dragon. Some big names from Mexico would also wrestle for Universal Pro Wrestling, like Lizmark, Pero Aguayo, and Negro Casas. Another of the big stars from Universal Pro Wrestling was Gran Hamada, amongst others. Sticking with Japan, we go to the Japanese version of the UWF, or the newborn UWF. The original UWF started in 1984, but folded in 1985. This newborn UWF started in 1988 after the top star of the UWF would leave New Japan Pro Wrestling for a second time. The top star was Akira Maeda. Maeda is probably best remembered for shooting on 3 different wrestlers: the original Tiger Mask, Andre the Giant, and Riki Choshu. This would be the final year of the UWF. They would have 12 shows this year, and in 1991, the roster would be split into 2 different promotions: Unions of Wrestling Force International, or UWFI, and Akira Maeda's new promotion, Fighting Network Rings. Other than Akira Maeda, some of the big stars in the UWF include Nobuhiko Takada, Yoshiaki Fujiwara, Kazuo Yamazaki, Yoji Anjo, Masakatsu Funaki, and Minoru Suzuki. The next promotion we're going to talk about is also from Japan. This is Super World of Sports, SWS. We touched on this a little bit in episode 7, the All Japan episode, where Genichiro Tenryu would have his final match with Jumbo Tsuruta on April 19th, 1990. Tenryu would leave All Japan Pro Wrestling after this match, and in the following months, a lot of the All Japan talent would follow Tenryu to this new promotion, Super World of Sports. All Japan wrestlers that were following Tenryu to this new promotion, SWS, would include Yoshiaki Yatsu, the Great Kabuki, Samson Fuyuki, and Goro Tsurumi. Other wrestlers that would join the SWS would include George and Shunichi, the Takano brothers, Kendo Nagasaki, Naoki Sano, and Masao Orihara. SWS would not have any championship belts in 1990, but they would start a working relationship with the World Wrestling Federation. Next up, the JWP, Japan Women's Pro Wrestling. Now, this isn't the same JWP that we would see in the mid-90s. This company started in 1986. Stars such as Cutie Suzuki, Plum Mariko, Mayumi Ozaki, Devil Masami, Itsuko Yamazaki, Eagle Sawai, the future Dynamite Kensai, at this point going by the name of Miss A. They would also have North American wrestlers Rockin' Robin and Luna Vachon. They would all wrestle for the JWP in 1990. Next on the list, Pioneer Senshi. Ryuma Go's Pioneer Senshi has a strong case of being the first ever Japanese independent wrestling promotion. Other than Ryuma Go, wrestlers that wrestled for Pioneer Senshi in 1990 include Apollo Sugawara, Masanobu Kurisu, Hiro Saito, Tatsutoshi Goto, and Super Strong Machine. Going over to Mexico now, we have two Mexican wrestling promotions. First, the UWA, the Universal Wrestling Association. Champions in the UWA that year would include Big Van Vader as the UWA World Heavyweight Champion. Also, for many years, the UWA had the WWF Light Heavyweight Championship. In 1990, the holder of the WWF Light Heavyweight Championship was Villano III. The UWA Welterweight Championship was held by El Hijo del Santo. The UWA would close its doors in 1995. The other Mexican wrestling promotion is the WWA, the World Wrestling Association. The WWA World Heavyweight Champion was Dos Caras, and the WWA Welterweight Champion was El Hijo del Santo. Yes, El Hijo del Santo had two championship belts in 1990 in two different promotions. Also in January of 1990, the WWA would send over a championship belt to FMW, and that would be FMW's top title for the first few years. It would be known as the WWA Brass Knuckles Championship. The next promotion would be based out of Germany and Austria. This was the Catch Wrestling Association, or the CWA. The owner and top star of the promotion, Otto Wanz, would start the year off as the CWA World Heavyweight Champion, but would vacate the title on June 30th. On December 22nd, 1990, the vacant belt would be won by Bull Power. Bull Power had another name in 1990, Big Van Vader. That means Vader was IWGP Heavyweight Champion, UWA World Heavyweight Champion, and CWA World Heavyweight Champion, all in the same year. Going to the UK now, we're going to talk about All-Star Wrestling. In 1990, the legendary Mark Rollerball Rocco, he was still the World Heavy Middleweight Champion. Mal Sanders and Doc Dean would both hold the British welterweight title. The Superflies, Jimmy Ocean and Ricky Knight, were the British Open Tag Team Champions. If you don't know who Ricky Knight is, he is the father of Saraya from AEW. Steve Gray would win the British Lightweight title, and both Danny Collins and Richie Brooks would hold the British Heavy Middleweight Championship. The UK scene at this point in time is not what it used to be. The boom period of Big Daddy in the 1980s was over. Switching over to Canada now, we have West 4 Wrestling Alliance, or the WFWA. The top title in the WFWA is the WFWA Canadian Championship, and it is held by Akam Singh. Other wrestlers wrestling for the WFWA include the French Mad Dog, Kerry Brown, Ken Patera, Scott Norton, Eddie Watts, Adnan El Casey, The Natural, this would be the future Don Callis, The Grappler, The Frog, Bob Brown, Chi-Chi Cruz, Brian Jules, and Mike Lazansky. That December, the WFWA would have a battle royal for the vacant WFWA television title that would be won by Jason Power. Also still around in 1990 was Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. The next promotion we're going to talk about is one of those territories that is surviving, Pacific Northwest Wrestling. The Portland territory at the start of 1990 has Scotty the Body as the PNW champion. Scotty the Body later on in the decade would become Raven in ECW. Other PNW champions that year would include Curtis Thompson, Brian Adams, who would make his debut for the WWF this year as the third member of Demolition Crush. Scott Norton, that would wrestle later on in the decade for both WCW and New Japan Pro Wrestling. The Grappler and Steve Dahl. Steve Dahl would end 1990 as the PNW Heavyweight Champion. The Pacific Northwest Tag Team Champions to start the year were Brian Adams and the Grappler. Other tag team champions in 1990 would include the Southern Rockers, the Juice Patrol, Beetlejuice, who was Art Barr, and Big Juice. This was a parody of the Beetlejuice character from the movies. Other tag team champions would also include the US Mail, the Latin Connection, Larry and Rip Oliver, the Wrecking Crew, Scotty the Body and Steve Dahl, and the Wrecking Crew would win the titles back on December 5th and finish the year as the tag team champions. Art Barr, under the Beetlejuice gimmick, would actually wrestle for WCW, but would have to use the name The Juicer because he could not use Beetlejuice. Other big names wrestling for Pacific Northwest in 1990 include Billy Jack Haynes, Moondog Moretti, Nord the Barbarian. A year later, he would be the Berserker in the WWF, Bart Sawyer, and Jimmy Jack Funk. Next promotion on the list is the LPWA, the Ladies Professional Wrestling Association. They had 2 championship belts in 1990. First, their singles title, the LPWA Championship, which was held by Susan Sexton. The LPWA Tag Team titles were held by Team America, Heidi Lee Morgan and Misty Blue. Other wrestlers that would wrestle for LPWA would include Bambi, Georgia Brown, this is the future Jacqueline in the WWF, the Glamour Girls, this is Leilani Kai and Judy Martin, Wendy Richter, former WWF Women's Champion, Tina Moretti, future Ivory in the WWF, the future Alundra Blaze, now going by Medusa, Terry Powers, which is the future Tori in the late 90s WWF, Reggie Bennett, and the valet of Exotic Adrian Street, Miss Linda. LPWA also had 2 TV shows. The first one was LPWA The Super Ladies, and the second one was LPWA Championship Wrestling. Before going to the WWF in the summer of 1990, Sheik Adnan El Casey was a manager for LPWA. And finally here for LPWA, at WCW Clash of the Champions 12 Mountain Madness, Susan Sexton successfully defended the LPWA Championship versus Bambi. The next promotion we're going to talk about was based in England, and it is the World Alliance Wrestling. There's not a lot of footage that exists of the WAW. I only found one video, and here are some of the wrestlers that I saw on this video. Jimmy West, the Starlight Express, which was the Gibb brothers, Sergeant Pepper, Kurt Hines, a gigantic masked wrestler called the Colossus, the Barbarians, which are the tag team champions. The tag titles are also represented by a trophy, not a championship belt. And finally, Samurai Warrior, that is a complete ripoff of Kendo Nagasaki, the legendary UK wrestler. The next promotion is the WWA in Houston, Texas. This was the Western Wrestling Alliance. There's very little footage that exists online, but here are some of the wrestlers that wrestled for the WWA. Bugsy Lucchini, Scott Putski, Thor, Eddie and Hector Guerrero, Ivan Putski, the Russian Brute, Steve Dane, and the most interesting is G.I. Bro, the future Booker T. There is one promo by G.I. Bro where he is talking about wrestling the Super Collider, Thor, and the Warrior. Now, I don't know who this Warrior is, but is it possible that the WWA had their own ripoff Ultimate Warrior? Maybe. Only a few promotions left. Next up, the UCW out of Kansas City. This is the Universal Championship Wrestling. Their champion in 1990 was Rick McCord. Other wrestlers wrestling for UCW include Dr. Tom Pritchard, Zebra Kid, the Exotic Adrian Street, the Nightmare Ken Wayne, Pork Chop Cash, Randy Rhodes, Mark Starr, Super Ninja, and manager Christopher Love. There is not a lot of footage on UCW, but there are some clips here and there. And the final promotion we're going to talk about is IPW out of Arkansas, the International Pro Wrestling. Now, the reason I chose to finish with IPW is that I really don't know anything about this promotion other than the videos out there. Even the wrestlers that wrestle for IPW, I had no clue who they were. The promotion was started by Wild Bill Ash, who apparently was a territory wrestler and held some territory titles. The promotion was started in early 1990. There's a handful of full TV shows that do exist on YouTube. A championship belt is mentioned during one promo of one wrestler, but no titles have ever been seen on the episodes available on YouTube. Other than Wild Bill Ash, other wrestlers wrestling for IPW include Keith Watkins, Jerry Dow, Richie Rouge, Bulldozer. Bulldozer and Richie Rouge actually have a good feud going during these episodes. There's also the undefeated Odell Buckingham, Michael Lee, Doc Savage, Motley Cruz, Tony the Spider, the Gorgeous JR, the tag team of the Mighty Nation, Red Eagle and Standing Bear. And possibly the one thing you probably saw about IPW, Jumping Jeff Farmer, who had an infamous promo that made it to Botchamania. All I have to say is, yep. And with that, we have finished wrestling in 1990. I know how big the wrestling world is. I probably missed a promotion. I apologize for that, but this is what I could find. I recorded episode 1 of Wrestling in 1990 on Christmas Day of 2023. This final episode I finished recording on December 2nd, 2024. I have a few people to thank before I sign off. First off, Corey Roby Show, thank you so much for giving me your old laptop so I could start recording by myself, and thank you for helping me with editing to make videos and for joining me in a couple of episodes, and just thank you for being one of the best guys I know. A thank you to Tracy Butler, who did all my graphics work. She's the real hero behind the Maritime Warrior, I guarantee you that. A thank you to Jason Casey, who designed my new logo that you will see at the end of this video. And a thank you to Joel Gallant, Connor Smith, and Mark Richard, who all joined me on episodes of the Maritime Warrior throughout the year. And a very big thank you to anybody that ever clicked on my video. Whether you agreed with me or disagreed with me, it's all opinions, and I appreciate you listening to one of my videos. To finish off this video, you will be seeing the awards. There are 4 awards: Promotion of the Year, Match of the Year, Tag Team of the Year, and Wrestler of the Year. So with that, thank you for listening, happy holidays, and I'll see you next week.
Ne fait que compter.